So today on Autoimmune Rehab, I am happy to welcome Sarah Reilly. So Sarah, welcome to Autoimmune Rehab. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about who are you and what brings you onto the podcast today?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. And yes, so who am I? I'm Sarah Reilly, functional medicine nutritionist, and owner, founder of Get Nourished, a virtual nutrition practice. Been serving clients in clinical practice for the last 17 years this summer. And love what I do, and have been working a long time in the realms of like chronic autoinflammation, chronic autoimmunity, chronic conditions such as that, a variety of sorts, causing people to feel, exhausted, inflamed, bloated, at times overweight, and just really feeling like they have kind of lost control, and they want to reclaim their body and their lives. And so I really, really enjoy working alongside my clients as a partner in their health. And it was also a very long journey of my own, reclaiming my own health, that brought me into this field, and then also inspired my studies and the direction that I've taken with it in functional medicine nutrition.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's typically how it works. Most of us that are in the field of helping people with autoimmune, we had our issues ourselves, and that's what got us into it. So, yeah. For sure. Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about how that story started. I know we're going to be talking about, you had some struggles with Lyme, but also some other autoimmunity. So how did that all start? Did you get, which one came first?
I know, the chicken or the egg. It's always a fascinating question. Well, actually, Lyme came first. I was bit at 25. I just turned 55 actually a few weeks ago, and I was bit at 25. And in 1995, people were not talking about Lyme disease, and I had a bullseye on the lower left-hand calf, and we thought it was a spider bite. I just moved to South Lake Tahoe for the summer, and got a lot of mosquito bites, but there was one mosquito bite that had a little black center to it that just never went away. And I proceeded to get more tired, and my GI changed, and the stress and depression kicked in, and it was this long journey of about 8 years before I was actually finally diagnosed. But in between that time, there were a lot of missteps medically that really compromised my health. And also, I nearly lost my life 2 times, iatrogenically, meaning at the cost of conventional medicine. And there was a time and a place for conventional medicine, but ideally the treatment and the procedures are spot on, right? And these were unfortunately not. And so it got very complicated. And, I was just 25 at the height of that time when you're like, big dreams. I wanted more than anything to be a mama and to be a professional and to do both of them. My goal in my head was to be like, little CEO and have my 2.5 kids in my white picket fence by the time I was 30. But by the time I was 27, I couldn't feed myself with a fork or button my own pants, and still didn't know why, because the pain in my hands and arms was so excruciating, and I had lost most strength and use of my hands and arms, and still no one knew why for a number of years. And so I eventually pretty much, lost everything, had to move home with my parents, and SSI and the whole deal, had graduated magna cum laude, and it just, none of it made sense to me. Like, God, what happened? Like, how did this all unravel? And then the deep unraveling came when a nutritionist and certain doctor thought, oh, this must be mercury poisoning. We need to chelate you. You're going to get your life back. And I remember saying, anything it takes, I'll get my life back. And I said, you got it. Let's do it. Other people seem to be handling it fine. Well, I had a DMPS chelation push at 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon, and by 6:30, I was in seizure, going blind, deaf, and paralyzed on my bedroom floor. Whoa. And my roommate happened to come home early from work that night. Had she not, I wouldn't be here. But she literally dragged me into Cedars-Sinai. Thank God we lived around the corner from it. She dragged me in literally by herself into the hospital, and last thing I remember was projectile vomiting and falling out of the wheelchair because I had no physical strength in my body. I was on the verge of cardiac arrest. My potassium, sodium had crashed, and my liver and kidneys were shutting down because I was mobilizing so much mercury. And so I woke up a few days later in leather restraints and a catheter hanging out of me, unable to speak or process really information.
Wow.
And my life changed. In that moment, I had become a universal reactor, meaning I was now allergic to everything in the environment because the mercury had just completely, I had mobilized stored stores, from red blood cells and bone and muscle. And it dumped to an industrial mercury poisoning level. And the urologist who was working with me, he said, I've never seen a case like this before in my 30 years of practice. He goes, I don't know what they did to you in that clinic, but don't ever do it again. And sadly, the doctor and the nutritionist, they lied to the hospital about what I was given. So the hospital didn't even have the accurate information of what I was dealing with. At first, they thought I was a druggie. They were asking my roommate, are you sure she doesn't do drugs? Like, what's going on here? Because I was suddenly having an acute mercury poisoning incident. And this was on top of no one knowing I had Lyme disease still.
So you had mercury poisoning too then?
I had mercury poisoning, yeah. It had accumulated. It had bioaccumulated in my body. I think when I had gotten Lyme, like my body just kind of stopped methylating and detoxifying appropriately, and stuff was just bioaccumulating in me. And they're like, have you eaten seafood all your life? I'm like, no, I didn't start having sushi until like, a couple of years ago, and that was occasionally. And so I was bioaccumulating it. But then I became toxicity-induced loss of tolerance, where I had lost my tolerance for self-tissue, enter the autoimmunity. And I had lost my tolerance for the environment. So I had anaphylactic seizures from the random passing car, or at night because we had just gotten new carpet when I had returned from the hospital. New carpet had been installed in my apartment. So within a few days, my parents had to come get me out of LA, and they gave everything in a day away to Goodwill. And, I moved into the desert where I lived for about 4 years because that's where there weren't pesticides. When I first moved there weren't cell towers. There wasn't, it was just kind of this pure environment they had created for me. But then Las Vegas built out so fast. What had become the outskirts where they originally lived within a few years was not the outskirts. And so, I desperately was looking for a doctor to help me. No conventional doctors knew what to do with me, or even the alternatives. They're just like, look, the cure could be worse than, the disease in this case. Any attempt to chelate me or detoxify me or to do anything or even get rid of the Lyme, and finally I found out I had Lyme. And by chance at a little clinic in Northern Reno. And so it's never just autoimmune process doesn't just show up out of nowhere. It's like, it takes pushing of the immune system. It takes exposure of antigens, that the immune system says, no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you. Like, okay, you're not listening. Boom, here comes the gong. No, thank you. And a loss of tolerance. And then you're looking at these activated pathways of then, tissue damage. And then you're playing a whole nother game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So all this, so you found out you had Lyme, you moved to the desert, all this stuff happened after your first initial experience where you almost died then.
Yeah, I still didn't know I had Lyme disease when I ended up in Cedars-Sinai Hospital. Had no idea. Still didn't. The doctors weren't looking for it. They were just running regular CBCs on me. And I kept asking, is there something else going on? And then I was tested and I had a parasite or something. They're like, don't be ridiculous. This isn't Lyme. This is a parasite. Yet I'm like, will you test me for Lyme? They're like, don't be ridiculous. It's just a parasite that's causing you to be so sick. But I'm like, I'm so sick. Like, is this really causing the loss of use of my arms and feeling like, my arms had been blown off my body? And so I went into a hyperbaric oxygen tank in Santa Monica. And when they put me under atmosphere and I came back up, my eyes were black and my left leg was purple. And they're like, my pupils were pulsing back and forth. And they're like, we're concerned you may have just had a stroke. And they're like, the only time we've seen this extreme of reactions, like both my legs were actually purple and both my eyes were pulsing, big black pupils, small, big, small, big. And they're like, we're concerned about your brain. You can't go back into hyperbaric. Have you ever been bit by a tick? The only time we've seen reactions like this is when we've seen someone who has Lyme disease. And I'm like, what's that? They're like, ask your doctor, ask your GI doctor, he'll know. And he's the one who I went back and asked, because I was in hyperbaric to quote unquote treat that that parasite, so to speak, with some really intense antibiotics, of which I was having all this, severe leg and hip pain. And little did I know, now I know that was a Herxheimer, because I was being given the heavy hitter antibiotics, which was hitting the Lyme at that time. But he thought it was just all the parasite. I mean, I was having fully black, white bowel movements. That's not normal.
Oh
and I'm feeling like my legs had been blown off and I couldn't walk. And so it just got so crazy. And every doctor was like, are you crazy? It's not that. I'm like, well, then test me. Right. And so he's like, don't be ridiculous. This is Cryptosporidium. That's ridiculous. It's not Lyme. And you just need to keep doing these treatments. And so I trusted him, and I did, because there's a certain point where you trust the person in the white coat. And you're like, okay, I'll do what you say to do. If you say this is going to help me get my life back, because the last thing you want to be doing at 28 or 30 years old or 32 years old is you don't want to be going to the doctor. You don't want to be spending your time doing that when you have dreams of success and a family and having kids and, getting married and all those fun things and travel in life. You don't want to be spending your time in a waiting room or in doctors who aren't listening to you, so, or in the pain and the fatigue and just missing out on life. So that was an evolution of the autoimmune processes that developed for me. Yeah, it started out with Lyme, and then with a huge hammer of a real traumatic mercury poisoning event. And then from there, it went from like a severe neurological pain with the Lyme disease to a severe neurological nightmare after the mercury chelation. And that's why it's like when people say, oh, my doctor wants to chelate me, I'm like, have they looked at your autoantibodies? No, what's that? Well, until you don't have autoantibodies to mercury, don't even touch it.
Yeah, you got to be careful.
Like people get a little too excited on the whole detox train, So there you go. That's how it ended up, me in the desert, living like the girl in the bubble with, my world was, I had a room about, I don't know, 10 by 10 or something that had an infrared sauna, an organic futon, a glass desk, and an oxygen tank. And I spent most of my time in that room. And if when anyone came to visit, my mom had to interview them. Like, did you shampoo your hair today? What'd you shampoo it with? Are you wearing any perfume? Did you wash your clothes and, Tide or anything conventional? My body, even if you couldn't smell it, my body was having a violent reaction to it. Couldn't process toxins, anything in the environment anymore. So I had to live in a really pure environment. And then eventually, a few years later, I developed extreme electrosensitivity, a year later, actually. Because of living on top of a fairly high voltage space. And so that was a whole nother angle of my own personal autoimmune journey. And then eventually, through the grace of God, I found a doctor in Mexico who saved my life and got me out of the cray-cray, right?
Well, that's crazy. So how did you find that doctor in Mexico? Did you know somebody that knew that?
Well, I started researching people who were getting treatment for Lyme disease. And I'm like, everyone who I talked to who'd done antibiotics, to their late stage, antibiotics don't touch. And then the only people I talked to were who had done homeopathy. And I learned of a woman, a certain homeopathic doctor that had been on Rhode Island, worked a lot with Lyme disease. She was then in Malibu. And I corresponded with her and spoke with her. And then, she's worked with her for just a little bit to take a few remedies. And it just wasn't, I was still deteriorating really, really fast. I was like 82 pounds and just couldn't walk very far and couldn't carry on much of a conversation. I'd had just implications to my brain and my heart from the mercury and the Lyme. And so, and it wasn't, Lyme always has little partners with it, and mine were Bartonella and from Borrelia, the Lyme, and then Bartonella and Babesia. And so it was like a trifecta of, not so fabulous, along with a lot of immune suppression from the Lyme. And so, the mercury. So she said, look, I just can't, there's nothing more I can do for you. Conventional medicine is going to kill you. And I've used all my tools I can with you. And she said, there's a doctor in Mexico that I know works with really complex cases. And I think he might be your answer. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, I can barely breathe the air in the United States. I lived in Mexico and I was a little girl. I'm like, how am I supposed to breathe the air and not go into, anaphylactic seizures in Mexico? And so, anyway, she's like, just trust me, just get down there. So push came to shove, a real traumatic push. My father saw one of my reactions in the middle of the night. My biological father, who was phenomenal, and he had come to help me get to this doctor in Malibu to actually see her in person. And that's when she was really trying to convince me to see the doctor in Mexico. And my father saw that night. I went into a really, really bad EMF reaction, which for me at the time was like, they were like seizures, very scary. And he saw it. And he was like, this is ridiculous. Something else is going on. I am driving you to Mexico tomorrow, and we're going to go see this doctor. So my daddy drove me down to Mexico, and the doctor got me in, and he was the one doctor that looked through my big, everybody's got a binder, right? The medical binder of all your tests and everything.
Mm-hmm.
He opened it up. Every other doctor just threw it behind him, and they're like, yeah, everybody has big binders. And this doctor actually opened it and read it from cover to cover. And I sat there in awe, sitting in front of him as he read it. And then he looks up at me and he said, cancer, easy. This, muy complicado. Give me 1 year. And in that moment, I looked at him, and I knew it. I'm like, fine, I'm going to hand it over to you and to God and pray that I can get my life back. And in a year, I was going back to school to become a nutritionist.
Well, so would you say that was when you had your big aha moment, was right then when you were at that doctor's office in Mexico, or would you say it was at a different time?
There were so many ahas, right? So many ahas in the journey. But that was my aha of true hope. That was my aha of getting out of what was a cage. Because I was told by many doctors and many environmental specialists, sorry, Sarah, you damaged your immune system. You may as well go live on the top of a mountain in Montana where the air is really pure and clean. You can't heal your immune system. It's done. And so there was a part of me at that time, that prior to that, after all that happened at Cedars-Sinai and the extremity of my life flipping upside down overnight, and my ability to live in the environment, there was a part of me that felt like I'd committed suicide, yet I was still walking the earth. Mm-hmm. As I was no longer able to go to a coffee shop or a library or a movie theater or out to eat or to live in the normal world. In a day, I said goodbye to my life and my friends in LA, and I had hopes and dreams there, right? And it was suddenly like someone took my life and said, it was just like flipped upside down. Like, no, this is your journey now. And this is the journey when someone has extreme intoxicity-induced loss of tolerance. And that's how delicate the immune system is. It can only take so much. And then push comes to shove, and then the shove tips you over.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that's really great that you were able to, get started on that. So what would you say, like, now, things have changed. Fortunately, I feel like for the better. I feel like a lot of people recognize that it's Lyme a lot sooner than
yes, they do now. Yeah, it's so much more talked about. In 95, no one was talking about Lyme, let alone in California. Maybe upper northeast coast, but not California.
Yeah, well, and now I think in California they recognize it a lot more, even in California, I think, than what they used to.
Oh yeah, it's prevalent. It's prevalent in California. Marin, Tahoe, so many places in California. It's very prevalent.
For sure, absolutely. So what would you say, how do you structure a typical root cause protocol for somebody that's been newly diagnosed, whether it's Lyme, whether it's mercury poisoning, let's say they have Hashimoto's, MS, lupus, whatever, the whole gamut, whatever they've gotten diagnosed with, how would you get started with recommending a protocol for somebody?
Absolutely. I take them through a process that is really customized for them. And so I believe in test, don't guess from the get-go, especially if it's a complicated case. Long-term chronicity is you got to come in and dive deep with me. And so that's where we begin with different functional testing, looking at the baseline of functional blood chemistry analysis and looking at patterns there. And then typically, just as a basic standard protocol, also doing an advanced stool analysis too, so that we can see just what is the status of the gut, the inflammation there, what bugs are hanging out there that can also be knocking on the door of autoimmunity because they're such toxic little buggers, right? And so they're going to be inflaming the system, adding to the whole pathway of, look, anything that's inflaming the body is going to drive those autoimmune pathways, right?
Yeah.
NF-kappa B to the Th17 to the IL-17, then you're looking at the fireball of tissue damage, right? So really doing a full broad diet and lifestyle overhaul with my clients, and really beginning with functional testing. Those are the basic ones: functional blood chemistry analysis, and advanced stool analysis test, DNA PCR testing, so we can see what's going on there, and also patterns in the gastrointestinal system and with digestion. And also looking at things like short chain fatty acids, because those are really important and oftentimes overlooked, but there's some really beautiful testing that we can do now to look at bile acid synthesis and also short chain fatty acid synthesis, because short chain fatty acids, they're kind of overlooked in the grand conversation, but they're immune modulating. So short chain fatty acids help turn on Th3, which is your immune modulator, right? And so that really helps to kind of put the brakes on the Th17, which can drive that pathway of tissue damage. And so we can do this in really fun, beautiful, balanced, tasty ways to help bring in balance. And first of all, balance, yes, in the diet to drive the microbiome, to start signaling those beneficial things like short chain fatty acids, but balancing the lifestyle with low stress and deep sleep, right? Again, to stay away from the stress pathway. Another way with diet, staying away from the stress pathway, is removing inflammatory food triggers or cross reactors to the particular tissue that's under attack in your body. And also balancing the blood sugar, because blood sugar goes low. What are you going to do? You're going to have a surge of cortisol that's going to drive the pathway of into IL-17. So I have this whole initial phase just called balance, right? And in the first 4 weeks, I've got people with, whether it's Hashimoto's, lupus, MS, crazy autoimmune conditions I'd actually never even heard before. In the first 4 weeks, they're starting to feel the balance, right? They're starting to feel the gas pedal let off a bit on that autoinflammation they have in their body, right? They start to feel the steadiness come in. Then the following month, we're going to dive into, really, once we've got the labs back of an advanced stool analysis, we're then going to take it a little bit deeper, still maintaining balance, balancing diet and lifestyle, fueling that microbiome, but now getting really pinpointed on what's going on in the microbiome and how to gently correct it, to remove, again, deeper inflammatory food triggers that may be aggravating the gut, and also removing microbes that might be aggravating the gut and the system as a whole, and replenishing, digestive juices and enzymes, and repopulating when and if necessary, not always, because probiotics aren't for everybody. And doing some really lovely repair. And all of this looks different for everybody, depending on where they're at. Someone might have a wiped out IgA, secretory IgA, due to having, autoimmunity. And that's basically, the housing, that's like your innate immune system on the lining of all your mucous membranes, right? That's like your innate initial immune area, your initial immune defense in your body. Someone might be wiped out with that, or someone might be really high. So you've got to take different approaches depending on where someone's at. Someone might have, be expressing really bad leaky gut, or calprotectin, or beta-glucuronidase, and all these different things. We have to really take into account what's going on with that individual. What do they really need? So I look at a web. It's never the same for two people who might have Hashimoto's. It's never the same. I look at a web of that person, and then I figure out, okay, where am I going to gently pull on that web for the greatest yield of result for that person?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Because anybody that's been listening to this for a while knows that I've interviewed several people with Hashimoto's, and even a couple different people with MS, different people with lupus, different people that all have the same diagnosis of the same label, if you will, but none of them have the same story. They all have different things that have helped them, different things that they've done to start their healing.
Mm-hmm.
So that said, knowing that, everybody has kind of a different story, there's a little bit of different things that have to be incorporated in everybody. What 3 dietary or lifestyle changes do you feel like move the needle the fastest for most people, given that there's obviously going to be, some variation for everybody based on their actual needs,
Absolutely. First and foremost, the needle will not move if they're not getting deep restorative sleep.
Yeah.
It won't. It can't. It's a gap stop. If they're not sleeping, if they're burning that midnight oil at 1 a.m. and then getting up at 6, it's just not gonna click in. Or if they're waking up in the middle of the night and staring at their devices, the blue light right into their, pineal gland, and they're not going to engage in deep sleep when you've really got to have that restorative time to restore the immune system. Sleep is a big thing. And then also, so often I have to pull people back on exercise. They're actually over-exercising. They're doing these long-duration, high-intensity exercising, which is just pumping up their cortisol for extended periods of time. And then that's just leading into the whole autoimmune pathway and tissue damage. So getting more gentle, really focusing on maybe some burst activity intermittently a few times a week, along with some resistance training a few times a week, and then doing some other gentle things like Pilates and yoga, and maybe they enjoy dance. But these long 45 minutes, heavy, high intensity running on a Stairmaster or going out for an hour run when you have autoimmune condition, you just have to be really careful. You're gonna be tipping. You can tip the lever there and overstimulate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And then, it comes down diet and lifestyle. So lifestyle, the exercise, and the stress. I have a whole process that I take people through called the True Vitality System, and it addresses all of this. And it takes them through a very formulaic way, from formula-based meals to a formula-based day, and how to create balance with ease and flow pretty fast, and makes it easy to implement it. Because it's really the implementation that's the key, because it comes down to, are you taking action consistently over time that can help lower cortisol on an overall basis, create some basis of more parasympathetic, like rest and digest mode in the central nervous system through your diet, right? Avoiding low blood sugar, getting in your protein and complex carbs, and just staying away from inflammatory food triggers like the gluten, dairy, corn, soys. And then oftentimes in autoimmune, you got to pull out those nightshades and the nuts and seeds, those higher lectin foods, right? And those different foods that can be aggravating and inflammatory to the system. And pulling those things out and giving yourself a good long period of time where it can be uninterrupted by those foods that are causing a bit of a flame. And you can get so much information too when you know what tissue's under attack, and then to understand what foods cross-react with that, right? Like Hashimoto's, let's just use that. The thyroid, has a similar protein complex, gluten and dairy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Soy, right? So it's like, we know those aren't your friend. They're not going to be your friend, right?
Nope.
The thing is that, you may not, quote unquote, get rid of your autoimmunity, because there's always a place with a history of autoimmunity where the ditch is within reach, right? The ditch is the ditch of autoimmunity is within reach. So we want to keep ourselves away from the ditch, right? That ditch of autoimmunity. A ditch is a flare, and everybody knows their flare. And so stress, poor eating, all those things inch you closer to the ditch. And so we want to maintain on a daily basis those things that help us stay far from the ditch. Balanced diet and lifestyle in a strategic way for that individual that helps to remove the inflammatory food triggers, maintain blood sugar balance during the day, avoid toxins, right? Mm-hmm. It's so big, the whole picture. Repairing the gut, yes. Gentle detox to then further remove gently no yanking with like big heavy chelation out of nowhere to someone's body, but just really gentle up leveling of those organs of detoxification in a gentle, strategic way that's guided by someone who knows what they're doing. And really formatting this for someone's unique body and their unique story and their unique goals.
For sure, absolutely. Yeah. So what would you say is one of the biggest surprising misconceptions that people have about autoimmunity?
You mean that the people themselves have about it, or that
Yeah,
people out there
people in general, or even people that have been diagnosed, what would you say is their biggest misconception about autoimmunity?
that they can't improve it? Some people think it's a sentence.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree that's definitely
Whatever. I just have Hashimoto's. It's just, wait a minute. You can modulate your immune system. You can do powerful things with your diet, your lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
Modulate it, because this is autoimmunity, right?
Yeah.
Immune system overactive. We can do this with proper diet and lifestyle. Do it all the time. Bring down those autoantibodies. People get their balance back. They're like, oh my gosh, I feel amazing. I feel like I got me back.
No, but I think you're totally right. For all the people I've talked to, from my own experience, from people that I know that have had it, a lot of people do think they get it and they think they're stuck with it forever. And unfortunately, regular healthcare, not traditional, more like traditional healthcare, not the, holistic healthcare, but a lot of the traditional healthcare feeds almost off of that idea that you've got this diagnosis and therefore you're going to have it forever.
Well, and there are different meanings to you're going to have it forever. Are you going to be, at victim to it forever? No, not necessarily. If you can get these pieces of diet and lifestyle and some real functional care and maybe other alternative care under your belt to help lower the flame, decrease the flame of what's driving the autoimmunity, what's going on in the diet, the lifestyle, right? All the infections, the toxins, the stress, these things that are like fueling that tumbleweed on fire going through the desert. You can calm it down and quench the fire with
the fire can still flare up a little bit every once in a while.
But it can flare up. Those antibodies are always going to be in the background, but it's a matter of how are you fueling them? Yeah. How are you fueling them with diet and lifestyle and environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, totally agree. So what would you say, let's see, what was the other question I was going to ask on here? What would you say would be one practical tip that listeners can implement today to actually reduce their inflammation?
Ooh, that's a good one. I would say, what would you implement today? I would say, get the inflammatory food triggers out of your diet. If they're not out already, get the gluten out, get the dairy out, get the soy out.
The sugar.
Get the sugar out. Yeah, that's just that just seems so obvious to me, right? But yes, get the sugar out.
A lot of people, though, unfortunately.
Get the sugar out, for heaven's sakes. Yes, gluten, dairy, corn, soy, sugar, right?
Yep.
Fake foods. Get the fake foods out. Think protein, think colorful veggies, think, for eating from the ground up, healthy fats.
Absolutely, for sure. So I know we have a link that we will include for people to schedule a consultation with you, right? That's what you said.
Yes, absolutely. I also have a link I can actually send you that you can put at the bottom of this that will actually be it'll be like a free giveaway that they can.
Okay, that'll be good. And that links to your website too, I'm assuming, so that people can learn a little bit more about you too.
Yeah. You can put my website and then also a link to this free gift for them too.
Okay, awesome, cool. Yeah, we'll do that. So we'll include the link in the description. So I want to search for that so you can go check it out. You can connect with Sarah. And if what she's been talking about you feel like is really helpful, then reach out and get in touch with her. And one more question before we go is, if you could go back in time to, I don't know, let's even maybe all the way back to your 25-year-old self, maybe around the time that you initially got bit, and tell yourself a piece of advice of something that you know now that you wish you'd known then, what would you tell yourself?
Wow, that's so good. Well, that's an interesting question. It's a really good question. And here's why it's so interesting. Had I not traveled the journey that I did, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Yep. That's how a lot of us are. Yeah.
Right? I wouldn't be. And it was a brutal journey, man. And no one knows that but me and God. But it was a brutal journey that has shaped me and where I am today. And I wouldn't be able to help people at the depth and scope and breadth that I can today had I not gone through what I did those many years, right? But it sure would be interesting if my 25-year-old self, if I just, and I hate to look back with regret, because that just feels negative energy to me. But, let's say in the breadth of this journey, I would say just to always know it was going to be okay. Just like to always know it was going to be okay. And that's actually something my father always told me. He's like, honey, you just have to, I remember, and I told him, I said, I feel like I committed suicide, Daddy, but I'm still on earth. And he goes, honey, I know this. And there's going to be a day that you look back and you're going to know that without this journey, you would have never gotten to where you are. And it doesn't make sense right now, but you're going to have a day where that happens. And you know what? My daddy was right.
Yep, he was absolutely right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Awesome.
So
that's great. That's awesome. Yeah. So thanks so much for sharing your story with us. I'm sure you're probably, well, I mean, I know you are. We can tell, those of us that are, if you're listening to this on audio, you'll find the link to my YouTube channel and you can check it out, the video too, so you can actually see what she looks like, see her expressions, that kind of stuff. But she's definitely healthy and thriving today. Most of the time.
I have strong arms now.
Yeah.
These arms that move now.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, anything else you want to share, last words of wisdom or anything that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I think don't give up. Don't give up. Know that there's always more help. There's always resources. There are things that you may not know about when you feel like in your darkest of nights. Don't give up. Keep looking and searching. And it's not all unicorns and rainbows for me. I still have flares. I still have episodes. I still have relapses sometimes, right? Yeah. And I'm working through something now. Yeah. But I know that this too shall pass. And I know that I have more strength now than I used to when I go through a relapse or a flare or an episode.
Awesome. That's great.
Okay,
well, thanks so much for sharing with us, Sarah. Yeah, so don't give up. And if this resonates with you, reach out to Sarah and we will catch you next time.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.